It was a few years ago that Michael Rood came to me, and he asked me about a verse in the Gospel of Matthew that we're about to look at. And there Yeshua says in Matthew, he says, "The scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. All therefore whatsoever they bid you observe, that observe and do." And what Yeshua seems to be saying here is that the scribes and the Pharisees, they sit in the seat of Moses. They have some type of Mosaic authority. Whatever they bid you observe, whatever they command you to do, that you must do if you're a disciple of Yeshua. And actually, I've dressed today as a modern-day Pharisee. I don't normally dress this way, but I've dressed in the garb of a modern-day Pharisee to illustrate to you what it would mean to obey the Pharisees. You would have to dress according to the traditional Pharisaical dress and follow Pharisaical practices. This is what it would mean to obey the Pharisees. Now, what is this seat of Moses? What's a Moses' seat? Well, this is a Moses' seat from the ancient synagogue of Chorazin in the Galilee that was unearthed by archaeologists. And the idea of a Moses' seat was that there was a special stone chair in the synagogue where the head of the synagogue would sit and teach with authority. And what Yeshua seems to be saying is that the Pharisees are the ones that teach with authority, so do whatever they tell you to do. You must obey them if you believe and obey what Yeshua says. Here's a Moses' seat from ancient synagogue at Delos. This is from an island in Greece. This is actually the oldest synagogue that's ever been unearthed by archaeologists. And already in the first synagogue ever found by archaeologists, there's one of these seats of Moses, these Moses' seats where the head of the synagogue would sit and teach with authority. And what Yeshua seems to be saying very clearly is that the Pharisees are the ones that sit in the seat of Moses. Whatever they command you to do, if you are a disciple of Yeshua, you must do that. Well, a few years back, Michael came to me and asked me what I thought of this verse. And I explained to Michael that I'm a Karaite Jew. Karaite is a Hebrew word that refers to Jews who only believe in the Old Testament. And as a Karaite Jew, I don't actually look to Yeshua as the Messiah. So my first reaction was, well, I see you have a problem, Michael, but it's not my problem, it's your problem. But I agreed to look at this and research this as a textual problem. I have a background in academia. I have a degree in biblical studies and archaeology from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And I've worked in various research projects, such as a translator on the Dead Sea Scroll Reader. So I said, okay, here's a 2,000-year-old text, which doesn't make a lot of sense. There's a problem here. Let's see if I can apply linguistic and textual tools on this like I would on a problem in the Dead Sea Scrolls or any ancient text. And what really is the problem, though? What's the problem? What does it mean to obey the Pharisees? Well, I knew exactly what this meant because I was actually raised as a Pharisee, as a modern Orthodox Jew. Before I became a Karaite and Old Testament Jew, I was raised as a Pharisee. And one of the things I knew was that to obey the Pharisees would mean to follow rules and regulations that govern every aspect of life, literally from the moment you wake up in the morning until the moment you go to sleep at night. And here's an example of one of these rules and regulations, something that I was taught growing up. I was taught that from the Shulchan Aruch, which is a universally accepted guide to modern Pharisaical living, and there the Pharisees teach that when a person wakes up in the morning, first he must put on his right shoe, but not tie it. Then he must put on his left shoe and tie it, and go back and tie his right shoe. Now, do you really think that Yeshua was commanding you to obey the Pharisees tell you to do these things? But that's what it said. That's what it says in Matthew 23. Whatsoever they bid you observe, whatsoever they command you to do, that observe and do. Do that. And it really seems that he's commanding his disciples to obey these rules and regulations that cover every aspect of life. By the way, it gets even better because another rabbi came along and added some notes to this book, and he lived in a country where they didn't have shoelaces. And he explains, even with our shoes, which do not have laces, a person must still put on his right shoe first. Now, if you were going to obey whatever the Pharisees command you to do, you not only have to dress in this manner, but you have to put on the clothes according to specific rules and regulations. And is that really what Yeshua is commanding? Is that what he's commanding you as his disciples to do? Well, when I was having this discussion with Michael, I said, okay, Michael, I see this as very inconvenient for you as a disciple of Yeshua. It's not my problem, it's yours. But other than the great inconvenience of obeying the people that tell you which shoe to put on first in the morning, what makes you think that's not what Yeshua says? Or that's not what Yeshua meant? He clearly says that. And Michael pointed me to some verses in the very same passage in Matthew 23. For example, Matthew 23, verse 13, Yeshua says there, he's speaking to the Pharisees, he says, "Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you shut up the kingdom of heaven against men. You neither go in yourselves, neither suffer you that are entering to go in." Now here, 10 verses later, after saying the Pharisees have Mosaic authority, that they sit in the seat of Moses and you should obey them, he then says they shut up the kingdom of heaven against men. So what's going on here? Something doesn't fit. Something's not meshing here. Here's another verse. Matthew 23, verse 27. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! You are like unto whited sepulchres, whited graves, whited tombs, which indeed appear beautiful outward, but are within full of dead men's bones and of all uncleanness. Now, is Yeshua really commanding his disciples to obey these Pharisees? Whatsoever they bid you observe, that observe and do. But that's what it says. Now, I still wasn't convinced. I said to Michael, okay, what Yeshua seems to me to be saying in the English is that the Pharisees are hypocrites, and because they are hypocrites, they make these burdens and they foist them up upon the nation. Because they have Mosaic authority, they have the right to do that, even though they don't actually do their own commandments. They make all these man-made laws, but which they have the Mosaic authority to do, according to Yeshua in Matthew 23, verses 2 to 3. But they don't actually follow these laws themselves because they're hypocrites, and that's how they keep people out of the kingdom of heaven. And so I said, well, what really makes you think that you don't have to obey the Pharisees? And Michael mentioned to me, well, there's another account that seems to be contrary to Yeshua instructing his disciples to obey the Pharisees, and that's the account in Matthew 15 of the washing of the hands. This is a very interesting account that I had come into contact with many years before. About 10 years ago, living in Jerusalem, I met a very interesting fellow, and he one day revealed to me that he was actually a Torah-keeping Christian. And I had no idea what that meant. I said, Torah-keeping Christian? What on earth is a Torah-keeping Christian? I've lived in Israel for 12 years, but I was born and raised in Chicago. And in Chicago, all the Christians I'd ever met always told me that the Torah is a curse that was laid upon Israel, and Jesus died to set them free from the curse. They're now free from the law. The freedom through... And I said, so, okay, what then is a Torah-keeping Christian? If most Christians are saying the Torah is a curse, why are you keeping this curse? And he knew I was a Karaite Jew, and he knew that Karaites, being Old Testament, are very textually oriented. And rather than explain to me in theory, he said, okay, let me show you in the New Testament the actual words of Yeshua that will explain to you what I mean by a Torah-keeping Christian. And my friend opened up to me to Matthew chapter 5, verse 18, and showed me the words of Yeshua himself. And there Yeshua says, for verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass. By the way, are heaven and earth still around? Yes, they are. Okay, that's a good thing. Till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall no wise pass from the law till all be fulfilled. And my Torah-keeping Christian friend explained to me, he said, look, you see, it's very clear. Yeshua didn't come to do away with the Torah. Not even the most minutest point of the Torah, the jots and the tittles, the dots and the dashes, even the smallest points of Torah, even those Yeshua didn't come to do away with. I thought this was very interesting and really very refreshing. This was certainly much better than the Torah is a curse and Jesus died to set them free from the curse. And I said, okay, so this means you do everything that it says in the Torah, the most minutest points. The jots and the tittles, everything in the Torah you do. And he says, yes, everything in the Torah, but, knew there was a but coming there, but there are certain things that Yeshua did do away with. Okay, I figured, it was too good to be true. For example, like what? I asked him, and he explained to me that originally in the Torah there was a commandment that before a person eats, that they must wash their hands. And Yeshua came and did away with this old ritual, this extraneous ritual. And I said, I grew up as a Pharisee, washing my hands before I eat several times a day, 2 or 3 times a day. Every time I went to eat a proper meal, I had to go through the Pharisee ritual of washing the hands. And so I immediately said to him, okay, you're telling me Yeshua did away with this law from the Torah. Where does it say in the Torah that a person must wash their hands before they eat? Because I knew it wasn't in the Torah. But he was sure it had to be there, and he opens up to Leviticus, and he starts flipping through the pages trying to find it. It had to be in, with all those rituals and sacrifices in Leviticus and Numbers, and he can't find it. And I'm telling him it's not there. And after a little while, he believes me and says, okay, well, if this isn't from the Torah, then where is it from? And I was raised with this rabbinical practice, and so I knew it wasn't from the Torah. And before I explain to you where it comes from, let me illustrate to you what it actually means to wash the hands. This is a special ritual that the Pharisees practice. And the Pharisee ritual of washing the hands, the Pharisee ritual of washing the hands begins with a special jug that fulfills certain requirements and specifications. And you take that jug, and by the way, if I take a bar of soap and rub it over my hands and put water on them, I have not fulfilled the ritual of washing my hands. I have to use the jug and do a specific ritual. The ritual begins, I pour water over my left hand, then I pour water over my right hand, and then I do this a second time, pour water over my left hand, and pour water over my right hand. And according to some traditions, I do this a third time. I pour water over my left hand, and pour water over my right hand. And I still have not fulfilled the Pharisee ritual of washing the hands, because I have not done the most important part of this ritual. And the key part of this ritual I have not done is the blessing that comes after the actual pouring of the water. And the blessing in Hebrew goes as follows: Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al netilat yadayim, which translated into English reads, "Blessed art thou, Lord, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments, commanding us to wash the hands." And this is what Pharisees say every time they eat bread, every time they sit down for a proper meal. They wash their hands and make this blessing. And I actually grew up with this blessing, saying this on a daily basis. And at a certain point, I went to my rabbis and I said, we're saying this all the time, several times a day. Where are we actually commanded to wash the hands? If we're making this blessing, commanding us to wash the hands, where is that commandment in the Torah? And I'd already by this point started to study Torah. And they explained to me that there's actually nowhere in the Torah are we commanded to wash the hands. However, the rabbis have made what's called a rabbinical enactment. The rabbis, according to the rabbis, have the authority to make enactments that add new laws to the Torah, add new laws that the people must follow. And these rabbinical enactments, these are called in Hebrew by the Hebrew word takanot. Takanot refers to these rabbinical enactments. That's really a very important concept, takanot. That's something we're going to see again later tonight. So let's everybody say together this word, takanot. Okay, so these takanot are these rabbinical enactments, and the classic example of one of the takanot is the commandment of the rabbis to wash the hands. Well, I asked my rabbi, okay, the rabbis made this enactment to wash the hands. Why are we blessing God for commanding us to do that? And my rabbis explained to me that God has given the rabbis the authority to make these enactments, and by obeying the rabbis, you're indirectly obeying God. Now, I asked, where do the rabbis given the authority to make these enactments? And they said, stop asking so many questions. And actually, we're going to see a little bit later what the real source for that is, and it's quite shocking. But so this, the washing of the hands is one of these rabbinical takanot. And when I explained this to my Torah-keeping Christian friend, he was in shock. He couldn't believe it, because he had been certain this was a law from the Old Covenant that Yeshua died to set him free from. And when I showed him this is actually a man-made law that the rabbi sat down one day and enacted, he said, okay, well, what's going on here? Let's go back to Matthew 15 and see what's really happening, because he had completely missed this. Is this really reflected in Matthew 15? And we looked at Matthew 15, verses 2 to 3, and there the Pharisees come to Yeshua and they say to him, "Why do your disciples transgress the tradition of the elders? For they wash not their hands when they eat bread." Yeshua answered and said to the Pharisees, "Why do you also transgress the commandment of God by your tradition?" Now, when I read this, it was immediately obvious to me that there's a very sharp contrast here between the tradition of the elders and the commandment of God. The tradition of the elders and the commandment of God are two separate and distinct things. And what Yeshua is saying is that these tradition of the elders, these takanot, these man-made laws of the Pharisees, they are a transgression of the commandment of God. And I realized that my Torah-keeping Christian friend completely missed this because he doesn't know anything about Phariseeism. He hadn't been raised with Phariseeism like I had. And so he didn't understand all these interactions and conflicts that Yeshua was having with the Pharisees. He reads about these traditions of the elders and he thinks, that's the Torah. And the commandment of God, maybe that's some type of higher law. He didn't quite understand this because he didn't understand Phariseeism. And I explained to him that in order to understand all these conflicts Yeshua was having with the Pharisees, what he really needs is a crash course in Phariseeism.